Welcome back. You're listening to The Journey to Technology Modernization in Government, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today, Harry Singh, the Chief Information Officer at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing at the Treasury Department, and Don Sherman, the Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of Product Marketing at Pega. Before break, we just started to get down the path of data, and really, in many ways, data is key to everything agencies do. I mean, every conversation I have with a CIO or IT executive or acquisition person, it all comes back to the data. So let me start with Don. When we talk about automation, we talk about IT modernization, a lot of this comes back to knowing what data you have, where to find it, and how to use it. So we're going to get to the how to use it first, but talk maybe about the where to find it and knowing what you have.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of pieces of how that plays into automating, for example, a process or a constituent journey, right? And the first is understanding from that process perspective where that data needs to be. You know, one of the things that we've worked with agencies to do as you take this kind of agile approach to doing things is rather than starting with the data necessarily and working back, which can lead to these big sort of master data management programs, which I have found to be huge investments that actually deliver very little value at the end of it. Instead, start with what's the process? What am I trying to accomplish? And if you can go and look at a piece of completed work, right? So we're working with DISA on the National Background Investigation System. What does a background check when it's been completed look like? Right? We're doing that work, we know what that looks like. All right, what was the data that needed to be provided in order to get that work done, and where did we need to source that? Right? So now I can build an underlying data model that's abstracted from the underlying legacy, but represents the data that needs to be in place in order for me to get a piece of work done. And then I build the work process to optimize for the user experience, for the experience for the person actually going through the background check, et cetera, and I pull in the data as needed to drive that process forward. But really starting with the process or the journey first and looking at the data that's needed is sometimes a great way to avoid the sort of, frankly, analysis paralysis of, we've got to get all of our data fixed before we can do anything, right? So.
And just to add to that, a lot of the users tend to look at the data in their silo.
Yep.
What is my function? So the approach we took on the process side, Don, was really first, how do we get users off sort of Excel spreadsheets, right? So they understand about the data trends. Yep. So they can just focus on, this is the data I need to make a better decision to create the historical trends. Then we educated with the Partnership Council. We established a data governance council too, and sort of community of analytics of practice within the BEP. And we got the right tools in. We were tool agnostic. If user wanted Tableau, SAS, Jump, Minitab, we got the licenses we need. So providing the right, one thing is to provide the right data to the right people. Other is really providing the tools for them to be able to make sense of the data. So that once we established that, then the second piece was really correlation of the data, to educate them further on that. And then we really saw, quite a bit participation in sort of where, technology is honed in, and you may not see the user base come to in a training class. So the user was a lot more engaged, and they knew that with the right data, they can actually make better data-driven decisions overall.
I don't want to go too far down this path, but multiple tools. You say you're tool agnostic, so whatever tool they wanted, but don't you end up with my tool treats my data differently than your tool? Is there an interoperability issue that easily solved? Because if you're using a taxonomy, if we're all standardized, then the tool is really behind the scenes.
Sure. So just adding on to it, on the enterprise side, we established a data lake, a Hadoop environment. So that's something we manage. But on the data analysis, folks are comfortable on the tools that they use, whether it's Excel, Access, or Tableau, or SAS, or Minitab, or Jump. But our objective there was, regardless of the tool you use to analyze the data, but the report is going to get published at the enterprise.
Okay.
So it's shared across the enterprise.
So that data lake creates that standard that no matter what tool you're using. Okay. Because I think I just hear multiple tools and I can imagine people go, oh no, here we go. Everyone has everyone's snowflake, right?
Sure.
We've heard that before.
I think there's also, as you think about taking data and actually getting it to the point that you can answer the questions about automation, right? Because I think a lot of this is, how do I find the places where I can automate? There are two things that we've seen be really powerful. One is actually using robotics to do a little bit of data collection, because I think there's a lot of blind spots in organizations and agencies about how much users struggle with technology, right? And you can actually use robotics to begin to collect what systems users are using in real time to get work done. And that can actually help you find, like, here are the actual, boy, if I can eliminate the need for this system, or if I can build a robot that connects these two things, or man, we see people copying and pasting from this system to this system 80 times a day, let's automate that. It helps you find some of those blind spots. I think the other thing, one of the things that we always say from a case management, which is really that end-to-end management of a piece of work perspective, is when you go into the first phase, operating a mindset of what you can easily automate, what you can easily guide a user to do, consistently guide a user to do, and what you can't do either for, at least track. Because I think there's also a missing area sometimes in the data of how the work actually needs to move between different systems and different silos. And having a layer that's actually seeing, here's all the handoffs that need to happen, then provides further detail into subsequent phases of the process. Oh boy, we could automate this a lot more. Or man, there's a real communication challenge between these two groups. How do we go fix that?
Do you get it? Go ahead, Harry.
Other piece, one is the data, other is really the transparency across it. So what we did was, part of the data governance is really focused on performance management.
Yeah.
How do we work with, not only internal within the CIO directorate, but also on the business side, is to establish those KPIs, the metrics. So not only for our support organization and delivery, but also on supporting our mission. So we're working on a yearly currency order dashboard, so that visualization is there. How are we meeting?
Yeah.
So monthly reporting.
Well, and one of the big, the things that happens to take this specifically to the world of software development, one of the big things that happens when you make this shift to Agile is your developers and your Agile teams become hungry for data about the actual development process, right? So you start talking about things like, how are my test cases running? How did my test cases run tonight? What have been my rates of deployment? When did I make my last deployment? What portion of my code base is ready to deploy versus what portion isn't? And that's another place where pushing that transparency out. You go into good Agile organizations and they have dashboards all over the walls that are showing the engineers the sort of results of the testing. And to me, that's a great example of, you've built this culture of transparency that keeps everybody honest and everybody sort of growing in the same direction of what you're trying to do.
Harry, you brought up an interesting point of performance management, and I think that's the next discussion around data. I want to go down that path, because it's one thing to find the data and know that it's the right data, but how do you use the data? And I think this can lead to smart decision making. I think part of what IT modernization, one of the kind of longer term goals for IT modernization is not just to have better systems, but better systems that can lead to better decision making. So are you guys starting to see that, okay, what data that you're focused on and how to use that data in a way that can alleviate some pain points, or to give your leadership, because we brought that up in the beginning of the conversation, better tools to make decisions that can affect the entire Bureau of Engraving and Printing?
Yeah, but I think on the technology side, we are governed by the compliance regulatory requirements. So there's enough reporting. Could be from cyber side, could be from our IT ops, data center footprint reduction, all that. But internally, on the data side, I talked about earlier, was providing the right data to the right people. Second is really to have them trust and confidence in data. So internally, we got an enterprise data quality product, so that we can analyze the data, identify anomalies. So there's better reporting. So data quality and integrity improves. So users have actually trust in data. And the last piece was, okay, now we're actually using the data, making sense out of the data, reporting is there. Now how do we work with our user base to develop those KPIs and metrics? And now they have confidence in data, so they're transparent. So the data sharing occurs across the enterprise. So then, there may be a business function who's not on board yet. So when they see the transparency, they do tend to get on board to say, can you help us build us our dashboard for our directorate?
Right.
So that's been very successful.
I think a great example of this idea of collecting the data and then understanding the data and then using the data is the continuous diagnostics and mitigation, the CDM program. I know that's a cyber discussion, but those dashboards are released at every agency. And now if there's a problem with a cyber problem, the head of the agency can see, wow, this is all red. We got to do something about this, versus before, which was, hey, the patch on this thing and this doohickey with the widget thing, and you've lost the leadership. So Don, jump in a little bit and talk about the data piece.
So I think there are a couple of things that's also really important, and part of this is a cultural understanding and a skill set that we need to teach our employees how data is used to make decisions, because I actually don't think it's a natural. There's a reason why most people don't make it through statistics classes in college, right? Because it's hard and it can be kind of obtuse. But there's a difference between what I would call deterministic decision making, and deterministic decision making tends to be pretty rule based, right? I don't need data. I don't need data to tell me what documents I need to collect in order to do a background check, because there are actual federal regulations that are written, and all I need to do is take that regulation, put it into my system, and make sure my system follows the rules, right? That's deterministic. Data only will ever get you to probabilistic. Data takes you to propensities. It says there's a likelihood that this will happen. There's a potential that this will happen. And you can get pretty high propensity in that likelihood, right? Google can identify that this is a picture of a kid with a bike because it's got massive amounts of photographic data that it uses to say, this is a picture of a kid with a bike. The thing to keep in mind is, if Google gets that wrong, it just means your photo is misidentified, right? I haven't broken somebody's life. I haven't made a horrific mistake. So people need to understand how that propensity impacts data, and where are the places inside the journey and inside the agency where propensity-based decision-making is great, right? So especially when you think about how you engage with constituents, you can use propensity data to recommend things that they might need help with, to help the service agent guide them through a particular story in a great way. But there are also places where I still want that propensity to go to an accountable human being who will ultimately make the decision based not only on that data, but their history, their experience, their understanding, and I know who made that decision and why. So I think there's also getting people to really understand that, and understand it's not that we all need to be data scientists, but we do in this data world need to be hiring and bringing on people who are data savvy and who understand what that really means.
I think you touched upon the probability piece. I see that sort of artificial intelligence, which comes into play. For in the Google example, for the decision. Internally, we leverage data on historic trends. For example, right? For our spare parts, for machine maintenance. So if I can look at the trends, see this part broke, within 6 months. And then the EM, who's really looking for that spare part to be ordered, he can work with acquisitions. We establish automated processes where it's min-max. So if it goes above certain threshold, automatically create creative acquisition.
Well, you can actually build an analytical model that says, at this probability of failure, knowing this cost to replace versus this cost for break fix, right? I can now make a pretty mathematical calculation that my cost overall will reduce if I replace at this point in the life cycle, right? So that takes that understanding of, here's what the data is showing us probabilistically, here's how I align that with a business outcome and actually get to a decision.
So Harry, are you guys actually doing that for spare parts right now? I mean, it's I don't know if you use AI and if it's considered the true meaning of AI, but it's a AI hybrid of sorts.
So it's like I'd say it's sort of a data analytics. I'll just stay away from artificial intelligence, right?
AI, we have to be careful. AI is a marketing term that we, the software industry, my apologies to everybody, have slapped on a whole bunch of technologies, some of which have been around for 40, 50 years in terms of data analytics, and some of which, like deep learning and image recognition, have been enabled by cloud computing and some new algorithms. But But a lot of that I would avoid that sort of AI term because it creates a lot of fear and Sturm and Drang. Versus no, you can use data and analysis to make really good decisions if you use it in the right way.
And that's what goes back to, I think a lot of this is what you're talking about is predictive analytics, which is something we've seen for years, but it's easier now because of the technologies that are available, not just the tools, but you mentioned the cloud, which we always have to mention the cloud, but also people's understanding of what the art of the possible is.
I think people's understanding, and I also think that part of it is the continual movement of those tools out of a realm of specialization.
Right.
I need a statistician to go figure out my predictive model, into, no, let me show to a data-savvy business person or a data-savvy leader what the indication in the trend is, and then give them the tools to turn that into something actionable.
And you also have a generation of people who grew up, I want to say our generation of people who grew up with technology, so we're not, what?
Yeah.
Like we sit down and we learn technology. So if you tell me, okay, here's a tool, here's Tableau, use it, or here's another data tool, use it. Okay, I can probably do that. Harry, do you find people that are in that world excited to be able to, okay, I can use this data and make educated decisions? Is that something that's happening you're seeing?
Yeah, I think the education and awareness is key part of our sort of as we modernize and automate. With that, so a user always approaches what's in for me. So when they come in, and that's as I mentioned earlier, the community of analytics of practice, we conducted not only the training for these different tools, but also analytics day. So where we had vendors come in internally from our directorate, we'll have use case scenarios, specifically targeted, depending on who's attending our session. So they actually see they sense the business aspect and how it's going to help them. So that's been very successful overall. With that engagement, then they actually decide. I really can I play with Tableau license, versus SaaS for those. So that's really been helpful.
And a lot of it is you don't know what you don't know until someone shows me. So I think it's awesome that you guys are doing Industry Days because I don't know that exists. Yeah. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can continue our conversation. You're listening to the Journey to Technology, Modernization, and Government, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.